Hi guys, welcome to this IGCSE Algebra tutorial. In this tutorial, we will look at the remaining two factorization techniques, namely trinomials and grouping. This tutorial, or the questions in this tutorial, are based on an analysis of 20 past exams. So, the first 7 questions in this tutorial deals with grouping. And it says factorize completely, and in number 1, we have xy plus 5y plus 2x plus 10. Now, before we look at this question, how do we know that we're dealing with grouping? It's when it says factorize and we are given 4 terms. We start by looking at the common factor in the first 2 terms. And of course that is y, because y appears in both these terms. So we take out y as a common factor. So y times what will give us xy, and of course it's x. Then y times what will give us 5y, and the answer to that is 5. Now we look for a common factor in the last 2 terms. And here the common factor is 2. So taking out 2 times x will give us 2x. And 2 times 5 will give us 10. Now you should note that x plus 5 inside the brackets will be a common factor. And we can take it out as such. So we take out x plus 5. Then what's left of the first term will be y. Then we have a plus. And what we have left of the second term is 2. Let's look at number 2 here. So we have 18y minus 3ay plus 12x minus 2ax. We first work with the first 2 terms, and we look for a common factor here. 3 is a common factor as well as y. So we can take out 3y. Then 3y times what will give us 18y? And the answer to that, of course, is 6. Then 3 into 3 here once, and y into y here once. And we are left with a. Now we look at the last 2 terms and we look for a common factor. Here we have a common factor of 2 for the numbers, and then x is also a common factor. So we can take it out. Then 2 into 12, 6 times, x into x once. Then of course 2 into 2 once, x into x once, and we're left with a. Now we see that 6 minus a is a repeated factor, or a common factor. So we can take out 6 minus a. And then what we are left with in the first term is just a 3y. And then 6 minus a into 6 minus a once, and what we are left with here is just 2x. So let's look at number 3. We have 6pq minus 4q minus 3p plus 2. We take out a common factor from the first 2 terms, and here the common factor will be 2q. So 2q times what will give us 6pq? Well, 2 into 6 thrice, and then we will need a p. So 2q times 3p will give us 6pq. Then 2 into 4 twice, q into q once. So we're left only with 2. If you look at the next 2 terms, there doesn't seem to be a common factor. But we notice that there's a minus in front of the first term here. So we're going to take out negative 1, and we'll just write a minus here. So we don't have to write negative 1. We can just write a negative. We're going to open a new set of brackets. And then, of course, we're left with 3p here when we take out the minus. Now what's very important, a minus times a minus will give us a plus. So when we open the second set of brackets and we have a minus in front of it, the sign here will always change. So a minus times a minus will give us a plus. And of course we still have the 2 left. Now we can see that 3p minus 2 is a repeated factor or a common factor. So we're going to take it out as such. What's left of the first term here will just be 2q. Then we have the minus, and 3p minus 2 into 3p minus 2 is once. Let's look at number 4. So we have 1 plus x, then negative y minus xy. We know this is grouping because it says factorize and we have 4 terms. We can start by looking at for a common factor for the first 2 terms. However, there's no common factor for 1 plus x. So I'm going to rewrite it. Now we look at the second set of terms, or the last 2 terms. We can see there's a common factor of y in the last 2 terms. There's a minus in front of the first y. So I'm going to take out negative y. So then negative y into negative y once. We can see that when we multiply back in, we're going to multiply negative y by 1 and we'll get back negative y. Then, very important, a minus times a plus will give us a minus. And y into xy, the y's will cancel and we're left with x. Now, if we put brackets around the first 2 terms, we see that it's a repeated factor or a common factor. So 1 plus x will be a common factor, and we're going to take it out as such. Then open new brackets, 1 plus x into 1 plus x once. Then we have the negative, and 1 plus x into 1 plus x here once, and we're left only with y. Let's look at number 5. So we have mp plus np. Then minus 6mq. And minus 6nq. We look for a common factor for the first 2 terms, and here the common factor is p. So we can take it out, and we are left with m plus n. Now we have a common factor of 6q in the last 2 terms, and we're going to take out negative 6q. So opening a new set of brackets, then 6q times what will give us 6mq. Of course, when we take out 6q from this term, we're left with m. Then a minus times a plus here will give us this minus. So once again, when we open brackets and we have a minus in front of it, the sign will change. So 6q into the 6q here, we're left with n. Now we can see that m plus n will be a repeated factor or a common factor. So we can take it out as such. What's left of the first term here when we take out m plus n? of course, is p. Then we have this negative, and m plus n into m plus n here, we are left with 6q. Let's look at the answer to number 6. We have xy minus 18 plus 3y minus 6x. This is a bit of a tricky one, because if we try and group together the first two terms, we don't have a common factor. So we're going to try and group together the first term and the third term. So let's first write them next to each other. And then we're going to group together the second term and the fourth term. So then, for the first two terms, the common factor is y, so we can take it out. We're left with x, and then a plus, and then 3. We can take out a common factor of negative 6 from the last two terms. So 6 into 18 thrice. Then a negative times a positive here will give us a negative. And then 6 into 6x, x times. So x remains. Now in the brackets here we have x plus 3 and 3 plus x. Now this is actually a repeated factor, because remember in algebra, a plus b is the same as b plus a. So we can switch around the contents of any of these two brackets. So I'm going to switch around the terms in this set of brackets. And now we have a repeated factor. So we can take it out as such. So we take out x plus 3. We open a new set of brackets. And when we take out x plus 3 here, y remains. And here 6 will remain. Let's look at the last question on grouping in this tutorial. So number 7. If we try and group together the first two terms, we won't have a common factor. So we're going to try and group together the first term and the third term. First, we're going to write them next to each other. We're also going to group together the second term and the fourth term. Now we can take out a common factor of 2 from the first two terms. And we're left with m plus k. We can take out a negative p from the third and fourth terms. So negative p is a common factor. So p taken from here, k remains. Then a minus times a plus will give us a minus. So we need a plus here. And we take out p from this term and we're left with m. We have m plus k in the first set of brackets and k plus m in the second set of brackets. But remember that a plus b is the same as b plus a. So that means we can switch around the contents of the first set of brackets or the contents of the second set of brackets. And we'll still have the same thing. So I'm going to switch around the terms in this set of brackets and write it as m plus k. And now we can take out m plus k as a common factor. So when we take out m plus k from the first term here, we're left with 2. And from here, we're left with p. Let's look at factorizing the trinomials in this tutorial. So let's start with number 8. Now, when the x squared coefficient in other words, the number in front of the x squared, is 1, then factorizing a trinomial is quite simple. So we start by looking at the constant here, in other words, a number without an x in it. In this case, it's 6, and we start by writing down the factors of 6. So it's 1 and 6, 1 times 6 is 6, and also 2 and 3, because 2 times 3 is also 6. Now we look at the middle term. We need to get positive 5x. Now we ask ourselves the question, which of these two sets of factors will give us 5 when we add or subtract them? 1 and 6 can give us 5 if the 6 was positive and the 1 was negative. But we have to check that when we multiply negative 1 by positive 6, whether we'll get positive 6 here. And of course, negative 1 times positive 6 is negative 6. So we know that this won't work. 2 and 3 can also give us 5 if they're both positive. And now we check positive 2 times positive 3 does give us positive 6. So we know that 2 and 3 will work. So we have two sets of brackets, and x times x will give us x squared, and then we write in plus 2 and plus 3. Once again, we check mentally that when we multiply out, we get back the original. So x times x is x squared, positive 2 times positive 3 is positive 6. Then we have positive 2x plus 3x will give us positive 5x. Let's look at number 9. We start by looking at the factors of the constant, in other words, of the term without an x in it. In this case, it's 28. So the factors are 1 and 28, 2 and 14, and 4 and 7. Now we consider each set of factors, and we see which set, when we either add or subtract, will give us a middle term of positive 3. We need positive 3x as a middle term here. 1 and 28 can never give us positive 3, whether we add them or subtract them. And neither can 2 and 14. 4 and 7 can give us positive 3 if the 7 was positive and the 4 was negative. Now we check that when we multiply these two numbers, we get negative 28. So negative 4 times positive 7 will give us negative 28. So we know that this set of factors works. So we open two sets of brackets, and then x times x will give us x squared, and we write in negative 4 and positive 7, or plus 7. Now we must check that when we multiply out mentally, we get back the original. So x times x will give us x squared, negative 4 times positive 7 will give us negative 28, then negative 4x plus 7x will give us positive 3x. Let's look at number 10. We start by writing down all the factors of the constant term. In other words, the term without an x in it. And here you can use your calculator. The factors are 2 and 66, 3 and 43, 4 and 33, 6 and 22, and 11 and 12. We need to see which set of factors, when we either add or subtract them, gives us a middle term of negative 1x. In other words, we want negative 1 here. 2 and 66 can never give us negative 1, whether we add or subtract them. Neither can 3 and 43, 4 and 33, and 6 and 22. 11 and 12 can give us negative 1. If the 12 was negative and 11 was positive. We check that when we multiply these two numbers, we get negative 132. So positive 11 times negative 12 does give us negative 132. So we know that this set of factors works. So we open two sets of brackets. Then x times x will give us x squared. And we put in the positive 11 or plus 11 and minus 12. Now we multiply out mentally to see whether we get back the original. So x times x will give us x squared. Positive 11 times negative 12 gives us negative 132. And then positive 11x minus 12x will give us minus 1x or minus x. Let's look at number 11. We start by writing down all the factors of 84. And once again, you can use a calculator here. So the factors are 1 and 84, because 1 times 84 will give us 84. Then 2 and 42, 3 and 28, 4 and 21, 6 and 14, and 7 and 12. We look at each set of factors. We need to find the set of factors that when we add or subtract them, we get a middle term of positive 5 here, or positive 5y. So we need a plus 5. 1 and 84 can never give us plus 5, whether we add or subtract, and neither can give any of these factors. 7 and 12 can give us positive 5, and that is when the 12 is, or if the 12 is positive and the 7 is negative. So negative 7 plus 12 will give us plus 5. We check that when we multiply them, we get negative 84. So negative 7 times positive 12 does give us negative 84. Now we open two sets of brackets. Y times y will give us y squared. And we write in the negative 7 and the positive 12. We do a final check and multiply out mentally to see whether we get back the original. Y times y is y squared. Negative 7 times positive 12 is negative 84. Then we have negative 7y plus 12y. And that does give us positive 5y. Let's look at number 12. So we start by writing down all the factors of 18. So it's 1 and 18. 2 and 9, and 3 and 6. We look at each set of factors, and we want to see which set of factors, when we either add or subtract them, will give us a middle term of negative 3m. So we want negative 3 when we add or subtract them. 1 and 18 can never give us negative 3, whether we add or subtract them, so that won't work. Neither can 2 and 9. 3 and 6 can give us negative 3 if the 6 was negative and the 3 was positive. We check that when we multiply them, we get negative 18. So positive 3 times negative 6 does give us negative 18. Now we open two sets of brackets. Then m times m will give us m squared. And we put in the plus 3 and the minus 6. We do a final check. M times m is m squared. Positive 3 times negative 6 is negative 18. Positive 3m minus 6m is negative 3m. So let's factorize the trinomial or quadratic in number 13. We start by writing down all the factors of 6. So it's 1 and 6, and 2 and 3. Now, both these two sets of factors could work because 1 and 6 can give us negative 5. Of course, that would be if the 6 was negative and the 1 was positive. However, when we multiply positive 1 by negative 6, we get negative 6, whereas we need to get positive 6. So this set of factors won't work. 2 and 3 can also give us 5. We want negative 5, so it will work if both of the 2 and the 3 was negative, or were negative. Because negative 2 minus 3 does give us negative 5. We check that when we multiply them, we get positive 6. So negative 2 times negative 3 does give us positive 6. So we open two sets of brackets. Then p times p will give us p squared. And we write in the negative 2 and the negative 3. We do a final check. P times p is equal to p squared. Negative 2 times negative 3 is equal to positive 6. Then negative 2p minus 3p will give us negative 5p. Let's look at number 15. Now, it's a little bit trickier to factorize a trinomial if the x squared coefficient is not equal to 1. There are quite a few different ways of doing this, such as the cross method. But we're going to stick to one method, which I believe is the quickest. We start by multiplying the x squared coefficient by the constant. So 2 times negative 15 is negative 30. Now we look for the factors of 30. So it's 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. We want to get a middle term of positive 7x. So which set of factors, when we add or subtract them, will give us positive 7? Of course, the answer is 3 and 10. So 3 times 10 will give us 30. And 3 and 10, when we add or subtract them, will give us 7 or positive 7 if the 10 is positive and the 3 is negative. Now what we do is we take each of these two numbers. So negative 3 and 10, and we divide it by the x squared coefficient, so by this 2 here. We can simplify 10 divided by 2 as 5, or 5 over 1. Now we open brackets, or two sets of brackets. Now the numbers below here, 2 and 1, we will multiply by x. So 2 times x is 2x, and 1 times x is 1x. Then above the 2 here we have negative 3, and that will go in the first set of brackets. And then above the 1 here we have a 5, so that will go into the second set of brackets. We do a final check. 2x times x will give us 2x squared. Negative 3 times 5 will give us negative 15. Then we have negative 3x plus 10x, which will give us positive 7x. Let's look at number 16. So once again, you should note that the x squared coefficient here is 3, so it's not 1. So we're going to use the following method. We multiply the x squared coefficient by the constant, in other words 3 times 10, or 3 times positive 10, and of course we get 30, or positive 30. Now we write down the factors of 30. So 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. We need to get a middle term of negative 17x. So which set of factors will give us 17? And it will be 2 and 15. We need to get negative 17, so we need both 2 and 15 to be negative. So negative 2 minus 15 will give us negative 17. Now we take these two numbers, so negative 2 and negative 15, and we divide them each by the x squared coefficient, in other words by 3. Of course, here we can simplify. Negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5, which we can write as negative 5 over 1. So we can open two sets of brackets. Then the numbers at the bottom here, in other words 3 and 1, we will multiply by x. So 3 times x is 3x, and 1 times x is 1x, or just x. Then the numbers at the top here, negative 2 and negative 5, will go in the brackets respectively. So negative 2 is above 3, so it will go in this set of brackets. And negative 5 is above 1, so it will go in this set of brackets. Now we check 3x times x is 3x squared. Negative 2 times negative 5 is positive 10. Then we have negative 2x minus 15x is negative 17x. Let's look at number 17. Once again, note that the x squared coefficient is not 1. In this case, it's 4. So we're going to use the following method again. So we take the x squared coefficient and multiply it by the constant. So 4 times 9, or 4 times positive 9, will give us 36. Now we write down all the factors of 36. So 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, and 6 and 6. Now, which set of factors, when we add or subtract them, will give us positive 15? Of course, it will be 3 and 12 if both 3 and 12 are positive. We'll get positive 15 when we add them. So 3 plus 12 will give us positive 15. Now we take these two numbers, 3 and 12, and write them over the x squared coefficient. So 3 over 4, and then of course 12 over 4. Now 12 over 4 we can simplify. 4 into 12 thrice, so 3 over 1. Now we can open brackets. So the 4 here, we're going to multiply by x. Remember that we multiply each of these numbers in the denominators by x. So we're going to have 4 times x, which is 4x. And the number above the 4 is 3, positive 3. So our plus 3 will go in here. Then 1 times x is 1x. And the number above the 1 is 3, or positive 3. So we'll need a plus here. Now we can check by multiplying out mentally. 4x times x will give us 4x squared. Positive 3 times positive 3 is positive 9. Then we have 3x plus 12x will give us plus 15x. Let's look at number 18. Once again, the x squared coefficient is not 1. It's equal to 5. So we're going to use this method. We multiply the x squared coefficient by the constant. And we can ignore the sign at this point. So 5 times 8, of course, will give us 40. Now we list all the factors of 40. It's going to be 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, and 5 and 8. So which set of factors, when we either add or subtract them, will give a middle term of negative 6? Of course, it's 4 and 10. So basically, if 10 is negative and 4 is positive, we will get negative 6. So plus 4 minus 10 is negative 6. Now we take each of these numbers, 4 and 10, or positive 4 and negative 10, and we divide it by the x squared coefficient. So it's going to be 4 over 5. So positive 4 over 5. And negative 10 over 5. We can simplify this 5 into 10 twice. So it's negative 2 over 1. Now we can open our brackets. The numbers in the denominators of these two fractions will be what we multiply by x. So we're going to multiply the 5 by x. So 5 times x is 5x. And we have a positive 4 at the top here. So our plus 4 will go here. Now we take the 1 here, we multiply it by x. 1 times x is x. And the number above the 1 here is negative 2. And it will go in here. Now we do a quick mental check. 5x times x is 5x squared. Positive 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Then we have 4x minus 10x, which will give us negative 6x.